I worked the night shift for 24 years. 24 years of sterile white corridors, the constant hum of cardiac monitors, the smell of antiseptic that seeps into your skin and never quite washes out. I was a pediatric oncology nurse at Charlotte Memorial Hospital. You see things in that job that change the fundamental structure of your soul. You'll learn that life is breathtakingly fragile. You'll learn that tomorrow is a luxury not promised to anyone. You learn that quiet dignity is the only thing no one can ever take away from you. I didn't mind the double shifts on Thanksgiving. I didn't mind the cold, bitter coffee at 3 in the morning while the rest of the world slept. Every dollar I earned had a specific purpose. I wasn't buying designer handbags. I wasn't flying to tropical islands. I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a noisy downtown bakery. The smell of burning yeast woke me up every afternoon. I drove a rusted sedan with a failing transmission that groaned every time I shifted into reverse. My coworkers thought I was a miserable penny pincher. They joked in the break room that Martha must have a mattress stuffed with cash. I just smiled, sipped my coffee, stayed perfectly silent. They didn't know about the blue binder hidden under my bed. Inside that battered binder were architectural sketches, soil test results, photographs of a 2-acre plot in the rolling green hills 20 miles outside the city, ancient oak trees, wild clover that turned vibrant green every spring. That patch of dirt was my entire future. A custom home with a deep wraparound porch, a place to sit in a rocking chair with warm tea and watch the sun go down without hearing another police siren or hospital page. I didn't just dream about it, I executed the plan. I bought the land outright, cash, through an LLC I set up called Oak Ridge Holdings. My financial advisor had suggested it years earlier to keep my personal assets protected and private. Clean transaction. The dirt belonged to my company. My company belonged entirely to me. Nobody else had any claim to it. Then, my mother decided she could no longer live alone. Before I tell you about my mother, I want to tell you about the ward, because the ward is where I became the person who survived what came later. You don't spend 24 years holding the hands of dying children without developing a particular relationship with loss. Not a numb one. The opposite. Every loss sharpened something in me, made me more precise about what mattered and what didn't, made me very clear about who I was and what I had built, and what I would and would not allow to be taken from me. The children on the pediatric oncology ward were the bravest people I have ever known. Not because they were heroic in any theatrical sense, because they got up every single morning inside something that was trying to destroy them, and they kept going. Some of them made it. Some of them didn't. All of them taught me something. A girl named Sophie, who was 7 years old and who had been on the ward for 14 months, told me once that the best thing about being sick was that you stopped wasting time being afraid of small things. She said she used to be scared of the dark, and now she thought that was the funniest thing she had ever heard. Sophie made it. She was in college last I heard. A boy named Marcus, who was 9 and who did not make it, told me 3 days before he died that he wished he had more Tuesdays. Not special days, Tuesdays. Just ordinary school days with ordinary lunch and ordinary arguments with his brother about the television remote. I have thought about Marcus every Tuesday since. I have tried to honor the ordinary Tuesdays, to understand that a warm kitchen and a quiet morning and the sound of oak trees in the wind are not small things. They are the whole thing. They are every Tuesday Marcus did not get. That understanding is why I worked every holiday and skipped every vacation and drove the russet sedan and lived above the bakery and kept the blue binder under my bed for 16 years before the first shovel went into the ground. That understanding is also why what my mother and sister did to me was so specifically devastating. They did not steal a house. They stole my Tuesdays. They stole the ordinary mornings and the quiet evenings and the sound of the wind in my own oak trees. And they did it with full knowledge of how long and how hard I had worked to build them. I want you to hold that when the rest of the story unfolds. Hold the 24 years and the binder and Marcus and his Tuesdays. Everything that comes after lives inside that. Beatrice was an absolute master of emotional architecture. She didn't demand things outright. She built elaborate, suffocating walls of guilt until you had no choice but to walk through the exact door she chose for you. She started calling my apartment at all hours. She claimed her chest felt tight. Her legs wouldn't support her. Every time I recommended a senior living community, she burst into theatrical tears. How can you suggest putting your own flesh and blood in a home, Martha, after everything I sacrificed to raise you? I guess you'll just leave me to die alone in the dark. I want to describe what it is like to receive a phone call like that when you have just finished a 12-hour shift where 2 children got bad news and 1 family said goodbye. I want to describe the specific texture of arriving home exhausted to your bones and finding a voicemail waiting that is designed to make you feel like a monster for simply existing as a person with needs of your own. You feel guilty. That is the intended outcome. The guilt is the product. Beatrice was manufacturing it, and I was consuming it for 40 years before I finally understood what the factory was producing and who it was for. My younger sister, Chloe, was living a completely different reality in Atlanta. Chloe was 34, but carried herself with the fragile entitlement of a spoiled child. She had never held a job for more than 6 months. She was constantly finding her passion or recovering from burnout, all funded by mother's retirement savings. Whatever extra money she could gilt out of me. Mother worshipped the ground Chloe walked on. If Chloe stubbed her toe, it was a national tragedy. If I worked a brutal 70-hour week to pay for mother's medical equipment, it was simply my duty. There was never a phone call from Beatrice saying, "Martha, I see what you're doing, and I am grateful." There was only the next request, the next manufactured crisis, the next carefully constructed wall of guilt leading to the next door she needed me to walk through. I saw exactly what was happening, but my nurse's heart got the better of my logic. I went back to my architect and changed the blueprints entirely. I expanded the ground floor to include a massive independent mother-in-law suite, private sunlit sitting room, extra-wide doorways for wheelchair accessibility, a custom walk-in shower lined with safety bars. I spent an extra $45,000 of my savings to make sure she would be comfortable and safe. When the house was finally completed, I made the decision that would cost me everything, out of love. Out of a foolish desire to give my mother a sense of security in her final years, I allowed her name to be added to the deed of the physical structure. My lawyer explicitly warned me against it. He practically begged me not to do it. I told him she was my mother. She had nowhere else to go. It would make her feel safe. I thought it was an act of devotion. I didn't realize I was handing an assassin the weapon she would use to stab me in the back. For 5 years, my daily routine was relentless. Up at 5 in the morning. Mother's specialized low-sodium breakfast prepared. 11 prescription medications organized into daily pill organizers. Blood pressure checked. Then 45 minutes into Charlotte for a 12-hour shift holding the hands of terrified children. Back home exhausted. Cook dinner. Clean the kitchen. Listen to Mother complain about how lonely she had been all day. I want to describe what those 5 years felt like, because I think people who have not lived inside that particular kind of caregiving do not fully understand the weight of it. It is not just the physical labor. Though the physical labor is real and constant, it is the cognitive load, the endless management of another person's needs that never pause and never diminish and never acknowledge themselves as what they are. I would be in the middle of a critical assessment at the hospital, and I would remember that I had not refilled Mother's pill organizer for Wednesday. I would be driving to work at 5:30 in the morning, and I would remember that she was out of her specific brand of low-sodium crackers. I would be holding the hand of a frightened child at 2 in the afternoon, and in the back of my mind, I would be calculating whether I had time to stop at the pharmacy on the way home. Beatrice had not always been this way. Or perhaps she had, and I had simply not been close enough to see it clearly. But in the 5 years we shared that house, she became more demanding rather than less, more entitled rather than more grateful. She had found a system that produced results, and she worked the system with the efficiency of someone who has been doing it their whole life. Chloe visited perhaps once every 6 months. She arrived in a whirlwind of designer clothes and oversized luggage. Dramatic stories about her complicated social circle. She never lifted a finger to help. She lounged on my custom linen sofa, drank my expensive reserve wine, complained about how draining her life was. Mother gazed at Chloe like she was an angel descended from heaven. She patted her hand and told her how brave she was. The moment Chloe packed her bags and drove back to Atlanta, Mother's mysterious ailments returned with a vengeance, requiring my undivided attention. It was a suffocating cycle, but I endured it, because this was my home. The oak trees were mine. The porch was mine. The 5 years were not all bad. I want to say that, because honesty requires it. There were mornings on the porch with coffee, when the oak trees were doing something beautiful in the early light. There were evenings when Mother was in one of her softer moods, and we talked about her childhood, and my father, and things that had happened before the distance between us calcified into something harder. There were small, ordinary moments that I held onto because they were the Tuesdays. The ordinary Tuesdays that made everything else worth doing. I held on to those moments the way I had learned from the children on the ward. I tried not to waste them by being afraid of small things. Then came the announcement that set everything in motion. Chloe was getting married. Her fiancé was a man named Derek, a self-proclaimed creative entrepreneur who had already failed at 3 business ventures before turning 30. He spent his days playing electric guitar in a damp garage, convinced he was on the verge of a major record deal. They wanted a massive cinematic wedding. More importantly, they needed a place to live, a home that reflected the high society image Chloe so desperately wanted to project. Shortly after their extravagant engagement party, which I paid for entirely, the chief nursing officer at my hospital called me into her office. They had selected me to represent our oncology department at a prestigious 2-week pediatric medical conference in Chicago. An incredible professional honor. The first time I will be leaving North Carolina in nearly a decade. All expenses paid. When I told Mother, she smiled. Looking back now, it was a strange, serene, almost reptilian smile that should have made my skin crawl. "You must go, Martha," she said with a rare softness. "You work so hard for this family. You deserve a break. Don't worry about me for a second. Chloe and Derek are coming to stay while you're away." I felt a foolish rush of warmth. I thought my family finally saw my sacrifice. I packed my suitcases, hugged my mother at the front door, boarded my flight to Chicago feeling lighter than I had in 20 years. I didn't know that the very next morning, my mother put on her best tailored suit, walked out the front door, drove straight to a real estate attorney downtown. She didn't say a single word to me. She used the legal loophole my naive trust had provided her. Her name was on the deed to the physical structure, so she transferred the entire property, signed the papers, legally gifted my 2-story custom home to Chloe as a wedding present. My home, my life savings, my blood and sweat and tears, 24 years of night shifts and cold coffee and rusted sedans and a binder under a bed. All of it handed over across a mahogany desk while I was 1,000 miles away taking notes in a spiral notebook about how to better manage pain and dying children. The medical conference was 2 weeks of being seen as exactly who I was, Martha, the respected professional. Martha, whose opinion was sought on clinical questions. Martha, who had something to contribute beyond what she could carry and cook and manage. I did not know how starved I was for that until I was inside it. 2 weeks of being treated as a person with expertise and judgment and value. That had nothing to do with what I could provide to someone else. By the 14th day, I was ready to go home. Desperately ready. The oak trees were waiting. The porch was waiting. The particular quiet of my own house in the early morning was waiting. I landed at Charlotte Douglas on a miserable rainy Tuesday afternoon. Heavy purple sky. Freezing slanted rain. I dragged my suitcase to my old dented sedan. Transmission whining in protest. I drove through winding country roads, dreaming of a hot bath in the silence of my own home. When I pulled up the long gravel driveway, I immediately saw something wrong. A massive commercial moving truck was parked on the front grass. Heavy tires tearing deep muddy ruts into the lawn I had seeded by hand. Expensive modern outdoor planters I had never seen lined up near the front steps. My nurse's instinct kicked in. I thought Mother had a medical emergency. I scrambled out of the car, hurried up the wooden steps, soaked through from the freezing rain. I pulled out my brass house key and inserted it into the deadbolt. It wouldn't slide in. I turned it, pushed it, jiggled it frantically. Nothing. The lock had been replaced with a sleek electronic keypad. I stood on the porch in the pouring rain, confusion slowly becoming cold, sickening dread. I knocked loudly. A full minute passed. Then the deadbolt clicked. The door swung open. My mother stood in the entryway. No orthopedic shoes, no wooden cane. Dressed in a beautiful crisp silk blouse, posture perfectly straight and commanding. Her eyes met mine. No warmth, no motherly love. Only hard, calculated finality. Mother, what is going on? My voice was shaking. Why are the locks changed? Whose moving truck is parked on my lawn? Beatrice did not step back to let me inside. She planted herself firmly in the doorway, blocking the warmth of the foyer I had painted myself. Chloe and Derek were married over the weekend in a private ceremony, she said calmly, as if reading a grocery list. They have decided to make this property their permanent home. I stared at her, rain dripping from the brim of my hat, brain unable to process what I was hearing. What do you mean their permanent home? This is my house, Beatrice. I built this place from the ground up. She let out a sharp, irritated sigh, crossed her arms. Let's be practical for once, Martha. This house is far too big for a single, aging woman who spends all her time at a hospital. You don't have a husband. You don't have children. You don't have a real life. You work. You come home. You sit in the dark like a ghost. Chloe is starting a family. Derek needs this space for his music business. They need this place to build a future. You're just taking up unnecessary space. The words hit like physical blows to my chest. My own mother, the woman whose diapers I was prepared to change, telling me that 24 years of medical service and every sacrifice I had made amounted to nothing because I was single. I put my entire life savings into this dirt, Beatrice. The burning anger broke through the ice. Your name is on the deed because I trusted you. I put it there to protect you. And because my name is on the deed, it was legally within my right to transfer the structure to my daughter as a wedding gift, she snapped, voice razor sharp. The paperwork is finalized and filed with the county. Chloe owns the house now. Your things have been packed into boxes and moved to a storage unit on South Boulevard. The first month's rent is paid. I suggest you drive over there before the facility closes. You need to leave. Do not make a scene in front of the new neighbors. Chloe appeared behind Mother in the foyer, holding a large crystal wine glass filled with my favorite vintage Cabernet, looking at me with theatrical, patronizing pity. Oh, Marty, Chloe purred. Took a slow, arrogant sip of my wine. Don't be so bitter. It's just a house. Besides, Derek says the vaulted ceilings have perfect acoustics for his new recording studio. You always wanted me to be happy, didn't you? I looked at them. I looked at the mother I had nursed through imaginary illnesses. I looked at the sister I had protected my whole life. They expected me to scream, to cry, to beg for a tiny room in my own home. The crying stopped inside me. A profound, icy stillness took its place. Tears are only for things that can be saved. This family was beyond saving. I looked at Beatrice, then at Chloe. I didn't say a single word. I turned on my heel, walked down the wooden steps, into the freezing rain, got into my rusted car, drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. I let them think they had won. What my mother and sister did not know, what they were too arrogant to research, was how I had structured the original purchase. Yes, I foolishly let Mother put her name on the deed to the physical structure of the house, but the land itself, the 2 acres of premium real estate the house was built on, I bought that through my LLC, a company completely and solely owned by me. Mother owned the wood and the bricks. She did not own a single ounce of the dirt it sat on. For 5 years, there had been a quiet legal understanding that the physical house occupied my private land. But a legal transfer of ownership instantly invalidated that understanding. I drove straight to Caldwell and Associates. Harrison Caldwell was a ruthless, intelligent man who despised injustice. When I walked into his office, soaking wet and shaking, I told him exactly what happened. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered a slow, dangerous smile. We drafted illegal paperwork that very afternoon, since they now owned a physical structure sitting entirely on private property owned by my LLC, and because they were not legal shareholders of that company, they were legally considered commercial squatters. They owed immediate commercial rent for the land, $15,000 a month. Due immediately. If they could not pay, they had exactly 30 days to remove the house from my property or face immediate foreclosure, a statutory lien, forceful eviction by the county sheriff. Chloe and Derek had just finished moving their heavily financed furniture into my living room. They were planning a massive catered housewarming party for the weekend. 3 days later, right in the middle of their loud, obnoxious party, a professional process server walked confidently up the gravel driveway. He ignored the confused guests, walked straight to Chloe, handed her a thick official legal envelope. The panic that followed was glorious. My phone started ringing an hour later. Mother, frantic, high-pitched voicemails, then Chloe screaming, then Derek. I didn't answer a single one. I was sitting in a warm hotel suite, sipping chamomile tea, forwarding every voicemail directly to Harrison Caldwell. "Martha, you can't do this," Mother screamed on the 3rd recording. "This is illegal. You're tearing this family apart over a piece of dirt. Fix this right now." They fought it in court. The judge looked at their defense documents and dismissed the argument in less than 5 minutes. The law was completely clear. My LLC owned the dirt. They were trespassing. 72 hours to pay $15,000, uproot a 2-story house, or forfeit the structure entirely. They didn't have $15,000. They couldn't move a house. They were completely trapped. 30 days later, I parked across the street and watched. The county sheriff's deputies arrived. Derek dragging suitcases down the driveway. Chloe sobbing on the front lawn. Expensive mascara running down her face in ugly black streaks. Mother standing on the wet grass looking older and more broken than I had ever seen her. She saw me in my car, took a desperate, shaking step toward me, reached her hand out. I looked at her, smiled softly, rolled the window up. I legally seized the entire structure as payment for the defaulted lease. The house was finally entirely mine, the dirt and the bricks. I moved back in the very next day, changed the locks, sat on my porch in the quiet, peaceful sunset. I hadn't lost a family. I had finally taken out the trash. You would think watching them drive away was the end of the story. Toxic people don't possess the capacity for self-reflection. When you take away their unearned privileges, they don't apologize. They escalate. By the following Tuesday, Chloe had launched a massive coordinated smear campaign across every social media platform. Long, dramatic, tearful videos, sitting in a dark, cramped apartment, wiping fake tears, telling followers that her evil, jealous older sister had manipulated a legal loophole to steal her wedding gift and leave her practically homeless. She left out that the house was built with my life savings, that Mother had secretly transferred it while I was at a pediatric cancer conference. According to Chloe, I was a wealthy, bitter, miserable spinster who couldn't stand to see her beautiful younger sister find love. The videos went viral in our extended social circles. My phone started ringing again. This time, it wasn't just Mother and Chloe. It was my Aunt Sharon from Ohio, my cousin Barry, family members I hadn't spoken to in a decade, all calling to scream at me for being a heartless monster. People started leaving nasty comments on my hospital's public Facebook page, demanding I be fired for unethical behavior. That was the moment I realized silence was no longer sufficient. I went straight back to Harrison Colville's office. I brought my 20-year archive of financial receipts. For 2 decades, I had kept a detailed ironclad record of every dollar I had spent on my family. Bank statements showing wire transfers to Mother's account to pay off Chloe's credit card debts. Original architectural blueprints with time-stamped cashier's checks. Desperate emails from Mother begging me for money, followed immediately by photos of Chloe vacationing in Cabo on my dime. Harrison and I drafted a formal cease and desist letter. We didn't just send it to Chloe. We copied Aunt Sharon, Cousin Barry, and every single person who had left a threatening voicemail. Attached was a 50-page financial dossier. It outlined exactly who had funded Chloe's entire existence for 15 years. It included the original deed structure, a certified transcript of the judge laughing their defense out of his courtroom. The letter stated clearly that if Chloe or any family member continued to defame my professional character or contact my employer, I would file a massive defamation lawsuit. I would subpoena financial records, depose them under oath, force them to explain their lies in a public courtroom. The silence that followed the delivery of those dossiers was deafening. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Aunt Sharon never called back. Barry blocked my number. Chloe deleted every tearful video within hours. The smear campaign evaporated the moment actual facts were introduced. Meanwhile, the brutal reality of poverty was catching up with the newlyweds. Derek had based his entire marital strategy on acquiring a free 2-story custom home with a built-in recording studio. Now he was facing rent on a dingy 1-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of Atlanta. Without the grand house to show off, his creative entrepreneur persona crumbled completely. According to a mutual acquaintance, Derek was forced to sell 3 of his electric guitars just to cover their first month's rent and security deposit. The stress of actual adulthood began fracturing their fairy tale marriage almost immediately. Chloe complained endlessly about the smell of their downstairs neighbor's cooking. Derek blamed Chloe for losing the house. Chloe screamed at Derek to get a real job. The golden child was experiencing the real world. It was crushing her. Then there was Mother. Beatrice had moved into the cramped apartment, fully expecting to maintain her role as the revered, fragile matriarch. But without my 70-hour work weeks funding her specialized diet, without me cooking her meals and managing her medications, the illusion of her delicate health became an intolerable burden on Chloe. For the first time in her life, Chloe was expected to be a caregiver. Mother lasted exactly 3 weeks before she understood the catastrophic mistake she had made. When Mother asked for her specialized low-sodium breakfast, Chloe tossed her a box of cheap sugary cereal. When Mother complained about her phantom leg pains, Derek told her to turn up the television because he couldn't hear his video games. The angel she had worshipped her entire life was actually a selfish, lazy nightmare when forced to take real responsibility. One rainy Thursday evening, 2 months after the eviction, my security cameras sent a motion alert. I was by the fireplace reading a novel when the screen lit up. I pulled up the live feed. There on the edge of my gravel driveway was Beatrice, clutching her wooden cane in the freezing drizzle. No car. She must have taken an expensive taxi all the way from Atlanta, standing in the dark, staring up at the warm, glowing windows of the house she had tried to steal. She looked small, pathetic, utterly defeated. She slowly made her way up the wooden steps and reached a trembling, aged hand to ring the doorbell. I didn't get up from my chair. I opened the security app on my phone and pressed the intercom button. "Can I help you?" My voice crackled through the outdoor speaker, cold and metallic. Beatrice jumped. She looked directly into the camera lens, eyes wide and brimming with desperate tears. "Martha? Oh, Martha, please let me in," she sobbed. "It's so cold out here. I made a terrible mistake. Chloe is awful to me. Derek yells at me all day. They don't take care of me like you did. Please, I'm your mother. I have nowhere else to go." I watched her for a long, silent moment. I remembered the way she had stood in that very doorway in her crisp silk blouse, looking at me with pure, calculated malice. How easily she had told me I didn't have a real life. "You are trespassing on private property," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Martha, please, you can't do this. I gave you life," she wailed, leaning heavily against the railing. "The woman who gave me life died the day she changed the locks on my home," I replied smoothly. "You are just a stranger standing on my dirt. You have exactly 2 minutes to walk back down that driveway before I call the sheriff and have you arrested for criminal trespassing." "You wouldn't dare," Beatrice gasped. The fake fragility vanished, her old familiar anger flashing through. "I evicted you once, Beatrice," I said softly. "Do you really want to test if I'll hesitate to do it again?" I cut the microphone feed, leaned back in my chair, watched the live video. Mother stood there for another full minute, staring at the heavy oak door, waiting for the guilt to set in like it always had for 40 years. But the guilt never came. The well was completely dry. When she realized the door was never going to open, her shoulders slumped. The matriarch was broken. She turned, gripped her cane tightly, slowly shuffled back down the long, wet, graveled driveway, disappeared into the dark, freezing rain. I closed the security app, picked up my novel, found my place on the page. I thought about Marcus, about ordinary Tuesdays, about what it means to finally be in a home where the ordinary Tuesday belongs entirely to you. The rain continued outside. The fire crackled. The oak trees were out there in the dark, doing what oak trees do in the rain, standing in it, holding their ground. I thought the rainy night was the end of it. I was wrong. Toxic people don't stop. When they run out of social ammunition, they reach for illegal ammunition. When they run out of legal ammunition, they reach for something else entirely. It was 4 years after the eviction. The leaves on my oak trees were turning brilliant autumn gold. I was baking bread in my warm kitchen on a peaceful Sunday afternoon. A heavy knock rattled the front door. I checked the security monitor. A man in a cheap gray suit, worn leather briefcase. I opened the door with the chain engaged. He handed a manila folder through the crack. "Martha Vanguard? You are being formally served on behalf of Beatrice Vanguard and Chloe Vanguard. Have a nice day." He turned and practically ran down the steps. I took the envelope to the kitchen island, tore it open. Inside was a massive civil lawsuit. Chloe and Beatrice were suing me in Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC, for $300,000 in unpaid caregiver compensation and emotional damages. Attached to the back was a blurry photocopy of a handwritten promissory note. The note, allegedly dated 5 years ago, stated that I, Martha Vanguard, legally promised to pay my mother $50,000 a year for household management and property maintenance. It had a signature at the bottom that looked vaguely similar to my handwriting. I had never seen this document in my life. I had never signed any such agreement. Mother had never managed a single aspect of the property. I had done everything myself while working full-time. They had forged my signature. Chloe, desperate and suffocating in a miserable apartment, had convinced our aging mother to commit serious felony fraud just to squeeze one last drop of blood out of my veins. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I carefully placed the documents back in the folder, washed my hands, dialed the only number that mattered. "Harrison," I said when he picked up on the second ring. "They are back. This time, they have forged a contract." Harrison Caldwell let out a slow, dark chuckle. "Martha, my dear," he purred. "I was beginning to think I would never get to destroy them again. Bring the documents Monday morning. We are not just going to defend this. We are going to countersue them so hard the earth will shake beneath their feet." The next morning, I sat in Harrison's office, watching him examine the promissory note under a bright magnifying glass. "It's a clever forgery," Harrison murmured. "Chloe clearly spent hours tracing your signature from old birthday cards or checks. But desperate people always rush the execution. Look at the date, Martha." He pointed to the top right corner of the page. "October 14th. I was in Chicago on October 14th, I whispered, the realization hitting like a freight train. "I was at the pediatric oncology conference. I have flight records, hotel receipts, seminar attendance logs. It is physically impossible for me to have signed a document in Charlotte on that date." The smile of a tiger watching a blind gazelle walk into a steel cage. "Exactly. But we are not going to tell them that right away. We are going to let them walk confidently into a sworn deposition. We are going to let them commit perjury on the official legal record. And then, Martha, we are going to drop the hammer. For 6 months, Chloe sent smug, intimidating emails through her new lawyer, a notorious ambulance chaser who operated on contingency. Clearly thought he had stumbled into an easy settlement. They demanded I sell the house to pay them $300,000, threatened to go to the local news. I ignored every threat. I went to work. I saved the lives of sick children. I watered my garden. I let them build their confidence higher and higher, knowing exactly how devastating the fall was going to be. The sworn deposition arrived in late November. Harrison Caldwell's downtown conference room, mahogany panels, long polished table. I wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, hair pulled back in a neat bun, hands folded on the polished table, completely stale. Across from me sat my family, Chloe in a cheap, flashy dress, trying desperately not to look like someone who had spent 6 months in a mold-infested apartment. She glared at me with undisguised hatred. Beatrice sat next to her, in a bulky medical wheelchair she absolutely did not need, hooked up to a portable oxygen concentrator that wasn't even turned on. Their lawyer was a sweaty, red-faced man named Mr. Larkin, looking far too confident for a man about to lose his license. A certified court reporter sat quietly at the end of the table, fingers poised over her stenotype machine, ready to record every lie about to leave their mouths. Harrison began with a quiet precision of an ocean undertow. "Let the official record reflect that we are here regarding Vanguard versus Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC. You are both currently under oath. Do you understand that lying in a sworn deposition is a serious felony known as perjury? My clients have absolutely nothing to hide," Larkin snapped. "They are the tragic victims of elder abuse and financial theft." Harrison smiled. "Excellent. Let's discuss this promissory note. Miss Chloe Vanguard, you claim in your official statement that you personally witnessed your sister physically sign this document Is that correct? Chloe leaned forward, smug and arrogant. Yes, I was standing right next to her. We were in her kitchen. And you, Beatrice? Harrison turned to my mother. You also state under oath that Martha sat down in that kitchen and signed this exact document, agreeing to pay you $50,000 a year? Mother let out a weak, raspy cough, hand trembling to her chest. Yes, she did. She looked me right in the eye, signed the paper with her favorite black pen, handed it directly to me. Fascinating, Harrison said softly. This event took place on October 14th. You are absolutely certain of this date? You are totally certain that Martha was standing in her kitchen in Charlotte on the afternoon of October 14th? Objection, Larkin barked, asked and answered. I am simply establishing an ironclad timeline for the record, Harrison replied smoothly. One more time. Under penalty of felony perjury. Did Martha Vanguard sign this document in Charlotte on October 14th? Yes. Chloe slammed her hand on the table. She signed it on October 14th. Stop trying to confuse us. Harrison slowly lowered the forged document to the table. The room went completely silent. The court reporter's machine stopped clicking. Harrison reached under the table, pulled out a thick 3-ring binder. It landed on the mahogany table with a loud, resounding thud that made Mother jump in her wheelchair. Mr. Larkin, Harrison said, voice losing all warmth, I am submitting Defense Exhibit A into the court record. Inside this binder, you will find certified, time-stamped airline flight manifests from American Airlines, sworn notarized affidavits from the Chief Medical Officer of Charlotte Memorial Hospital and the Director of the National Pediatric Oncology Board. Larkin frowned, his red face paling as he slowly flipped the binder open. You will also find certified hotel receipts from the Palmer House Hilton in Chicago, Illinois. High-definition, time-stamped security footage from that hotel lobby. Credit card swipe logs for every single meal Martha consumed between October 10th and October 24th. Chloe's smug smirk vanished, wiped completely from her face. Mother's fake cough caught in her throat. My client, Harrison said, leaning over the table, was physically standing in a medical conference room in Chicago, Illinois, 1,000 miles away, on the exact day your clients just swore under oath that she was signing a contract in a kitchen in North Carolina. The silence was absolute. Larkin was staring at the evidence, hands physically shaking. He knew exactly what had just happened to his career. Mr. Larkin, Harrison whispered dangerously, your clients have just committed documented irrefutable felony perjury on the official legal record. The submission of this forged document constitutes attempted grand larceny and criminal extortion. If you continue to represent them for one more second, I will personally see to it that you are indicted as a co-conspirator. I will drag you before the state bar and permanently strip your license. Larkin stood up so fast, his chair crashed backward onto the carpet. He didn't even look at Chloe or Beatrice. This deposition is completely over, Larkin stammered, frantically gathering his legal pads, throwing them into his briefcase. I am formally withdrawing as counsel for the plaintiffs, effective immediately. I had absolutely no prior knowledge of this forgery. You can't just leave, Chloe screamed, leaping out of her chair, grabbing Larkin desperately by the sleeve. We'd paid you a retainer. You promised we would win. Larkin violently ripped his arm away. You lied to me. You forged a legal document and lied under oath. You are going to federal prison. Do not ever contact my office again. He practically sprinted out of the conference room, slammed the heavy mahogany door behind him. Chloe stood in the middle of the room, mouth hanging open. Mother sat frozen in her unnecessary wheelchair, oxygen concentrator forgotten on the floor. Harrison calmly adjusted his silver cufflinks. looked at the two terrified women with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Now," he said softly, wicked smile returning, "let's talk about our massive countersuit." Harrison explained our terms with cold surgical precision. Because they had knowingly submitted a forged document, we were immediately filing a countersuit. Malicious prosecution, intentional infliction of emotional distress, attempted extortion, $500,000 in punitive damages. Furthermore, if they did not agree to our terms immediately, Harrison would submit the deposition transcript and the forged note directly to the district attorney's office for criminal fraud prosecution. Chloe had exactly 24 hours to sign the settlement agreement. In it, she would unconditionally drop the lawsuit, publicly admit the promissory note was a complete forgery, sign over the remaining equity of Mother's retirement accounts to Oak Ridge Holdings LLC to cover legal fees and my emotional damages. Chloe looked desperately at her mother, silently begging her to magically fix the situation like she always had. Beatrice just sat in her ridiculous wheelchair staring blankly at the wall. Completely broken. They had no choice. They were cornered rats. The very next morning, Chloe signed the settlement agreement, effectively bankrupting what little remained of their family resources. It has been 2 years since that final deposition. Chloe never recovered from the financial and social devastation. Without money left to support her delusions, she was forced to take a minimum wage job, working the night shift at a 24-hour diner. The golden child is now scrubbing grease off griddles at 3 a.m, serving the exact kind of hardworking people she used to mock. I think about that sometimes. Not with bitterness, with a specific accuracy of someone who understands that the universe has a way of assigning people to the life that matches the effort they are actually willing to put in. Chloe is finally doing the work, 20 years late, on her feet at 3 a.m, cold, bitter coffee, the smell of grease instead of antiseptic. She is not saving lives, but she is finally in the world, and the world does not close for anyone who does not want to be there. As for Beatrice, her precious favorite daughter finally placed her in a cheap, understaffed state-run nursing facility. No specialized low-sodium breakfasts, no wraparound porch, only Colt linoleum floors, and the bitter realization that she threw away a daughter who truly loved her for a daughter who only ever loved her wallet. I do not visit. I do not call. She is a stranger to me now. The decision to stop calling her my mother was not made in anger. It was made in the same quiet, deliberate way I made every significant decision in my life, with full knowledge of what it cost and what it was worth. I had been her daughter for 50 years, 50 years of love that was returned in performance, but not in kind. I gave her the house with the wide doorways and the walk-in shower and the safety bars. I gave her the 5 years of low-sodium breakfasts and organized pill dispensers and the 45-minute drives to and from the hospital. I gave her everything I had. She looked me in the eye in the doorway of the home I built and told me I didn't have a real life. The decision was easy. The decision was the most obvious decision I had ever made. It took everything I had to arrive at it. And then it was simply done. I'm sitting in the sunroom of my beautiful house, morning mist rolling over the tops of my oak trees. The silence is profound. The peace is absolute. I worked my entire life to build this sanctuary. I proved that quiet kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. They thought they could steal my foundation. They completely forgot who owned the dirt. I think about Marcus sometimes, the boy who wanted more Tuesdays. I think about what he would make of this particular Tuesday, the mist and the oak trees, the warm coffee, the sound of nothing that needs to be done for anyone except me. I think he would have found it exactly right, exactly what a Tuesday should be. I watered the garden yesterday. I have started growing things I used to tell myself I didn't have time for. Lavender along the south fence, a cutting garden along the back wall. things that take more patience than purpose, things that bloom in their own time without being managed. My name is Martha Vengard, pediatric oncology nurse, Elkridge Holdings LLC, owner of 2 acres of land in the rolling green hills 20 miles outside Charlotte, North Carolina. The dirt is mine. It was always mine. They just forgot to check, and my quiet rise is finally, beautifully, completely done. I want to tell you about the storage unit on South Boulevard because I think it belongs in this telling, and I don't think I've given it enough space. When I drove away from the house in the rain, I went to the storage unit. Beatrice had said the first month's rent was paid. I drove there, and I sat in the parking lot for a long time before I went in. Inside were brown cardboard boxes, standard size, the kind you buy at the post office. They were stacked without any particular organization. The things I owned arranged by someone who had never thought about what any of those things meant. I opened the first box. It was my books, the collection I had been building since nursing school. Some of them had notes in the margins from my first year on the ward. Some of them had my mother's handwriting in the front cover from Christmases long ago when she used to give them as gifts. I held one of those for a while, the handwriting of a woman who had once loved me enough to know what I wanted for Christmas. I thought about that for a long time, about the distance between that woman and the one who had stood in the doorway an hour before in her crisp silk blouse, about what happens between the giving of a book with a loving inscription and the casual, efficient theft of a home, about whether those 2 people were the same person or whether one had slowly replaced the other over decades, and I simply hadn't been paying close enough attention to notice the replacement. I decided it didn't matter. Both things had happened. Both were real. The distance between them was the distance between who my mother had been and who she chose to become. I couldn't account for that distance. I could only account for my own. I went through 3 more boxes. Then I closed them all back up. I paid for 6 more months of storage with my credit card. I drove to a hotel near the hospital. I checked in under my own name. I sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet room, and I thought about Harrison Caldwell and what he had said to me at my very first appointment 6 years before. When I had described the LLC structure, he had said, "Martha, this is one of the most important things you will ever do for yourself, not because you are expecting trouble, because you deserve to have something that is entirely yours, something that nobody else's name is on." He had said it very simply, and I had understood it, and I had done it, and now, 6 years later, I was sitting in a hotel room understanding it in a much more specific way than I had on the day he said it. The thing that is entirely yours is the thing that cannot be taken, not because it is protected by your own strength, which can waver, but because it is protected by the law, which does not waver for anyone. The LLC protected the land protected the house, and in protecting both of those things, it protected something more important than either of them. It protected the 24 years. Harrison Caldwell became more than my lawyer over the years following the eviction. He became a specific kind of witness, the kind you need when you are doing something that looks impossible from the outside. He had seen the whole picture from the first soaking wet meeting, through the landlord notice, through the courtroom, and through the smear campaign, and through the deposition. He had watched me do each thing in sequence, with outrage, and without theatrics, and with the specific patience of someone who understood that the work mattered more than the drama. He told me once in his office after the eviction was finalized that in 20 years of practicing law, I was the most dangerous kind of opponent he had ever encountered. I asked him what he meant. He said the most dangerous opponent is not the loudest or the most aggressive. It is the one who knows exactly what they have and exactly what it is worth, and who is willing to wait as long as is necessary for the law to align with the truth. He said I had done neither. He said whatever they had tried to take from me, They had severely miscalculated who they were taking it from. I thought about that on the drive home after he said it, about what it meant to be dangerous. I had never thought of myself as dangerous. I had always thought of myself as patient, as careful, as the woman who kept the blue binder under her bed for 16 years, as the woman who showed up for the morning shift and organized the pill dispensers and drove the rusted sedan. But perhaps those things are the same thing. Perhaps patience is its own form of danger. Perhaps the willingness to wait and accumulate and document and not act until the moment is absolutely right is the most powerful posture available to a person who does not have volume or spectacle on their side. I had never had volume. I had never been the kind of person who filled rooms. But I owned the dirt under the rooms. And in the end, that turned out to matter more. The cutting garden along the back wall took longer than I expected to establish. This is the nature of cutting gardens. You plant them thinking about the blooms, and you forget about the years of root work that come before. The lavender along the south fence is doing exactly what lavender does when it is properly established in the right soil. It is spreading, slowly and without drama, and in the direction it needs to go. By next summer, it will be something worth looking at. I have started keeping a different binder, not architectural sketches and soil tests and glossy photographs of a piece of land I have not yet purchased. This one is about what comes next. I do not know exactly what comes next. That is the honest answer. I have spent the last 30 years knowing exactly what came next and executing the plan with precision. The plan is complete now. The house is mine, and the dirt is mine, and the binder under the bed turned into a wraparound porch in a song room and lavender along the south fence. What I know is that the next plan will be mine to make. That is the part I could not say before. The plan was always mine, but the time was not always mine. The time was divided between the hospital and the caregiving, and the legal battles, and the long patient accumulation of everything I needed to protect myself. The time is mine now, the whole of it, every Tuesday. I am a pediatric oncology nurse who has spent 24 years holding the hands of dying children. I know better than most people what it costs to run out of time before the thing is done. I know better than most people what it means to have Tuesdays left. I intend to use every one of mine. The oak trees are out there. The mist is clearing now. The sun is coming through, the way it does on fall mornings. On this particular piece of land, in these particular hills, 20 miles outside Charlotte, I have seen this light in this place for 8 years now, and it is still the thing I look for first when I sit down with my coffee in the morning. It was worth every dollar, every shift, every mile on the rusted sedan, every bill I pay that Chloe should have paid herself. Every night I drove home at midnight to organize pill dispensers and make low-sodium breakfasts that were never acknowledged. It was worth all of it, not because justice arrived eventually, though it did, but because this light exists, and this porch exists, and the oak trees exist, and they are mine, and nobody else's name is on them. I built this. I kept this. I held this through every attempt to take it. My name is Martha Vanguard. I worked the night shift for 24 years. I owned the dirt. I still own the dirt. That is the whole story. That is all of it. I want to tell you about the night before I flew to Chicago. Not because anything dramatic happened, because it was the last ordinary night before everything changed, and I think it deserves to exist in this telling. I cooked Mother's dinner, salmon with a specific lamb and caper sauce she liked. Organized her Thursday medications into the little plastic compartment. Checked her blood pressure, which was fine. She was in a decent mood that evening. We watched a nature program on television about migratory birds. She had always been interested in birds. Her father had kept feeders outside every window of the house she grew up in, and she had learned their names as a child, and she still remembered most of them. She told me the name of a bird on the screen before the narrator said it. A little triumph she clearly enjoyed. I said, "Well done." She smiled. It was a real smile, one of the ones that reached her eyes. I went to bed thinking about the conference, about what it would feel like to sleep in a hotel room where nobody needed anything from me, about the seminars and the colleagues and the 2 weeks of being a professional in the world. I set my alarm for 4:30, and I lay in the dark and I listened to the oak trees moving in the wind outside my window. I thought about the binder, about the 16 years of saving and planning and the specific satisfaction of watching the foundation get poured and the frame go up and the porch appear. About the first morning I had sat on that porch with coffee and looked at the oak trees and understood that the plan was complete. I fell asleep thinking about oak trees. I woke up at 4:30 to the alarm. I made coffee. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of the sedan. I went back inside and stood in the hallway for a moment. Mother's door was closed. She was sleeping. I thought about knocking. I thought about waking her to say goodbye more deliberately. I decided not to. She needed her sleep. We had said a proper goodbye the evening before. I drove to the airport in the dark, parked in long term, checked my bag, went through security, sat at my gate with a paper cup of coffee that was not much better than the hospital coffee, boarded the plane. I did not know that the moment the plane left the ground, my mother was already making her plans. I have thought about that sometimes, about whether there was anything I could have seen in her face the evening before at dinner, in the way she watched the nature program, in the real smile when she named the bird. I don't think there was anything to see. I think she was simply herself that evening, the version of herself that had loved me once, the version that knew the birds by name. That version and the version that went to the real estate attorney the next morning occupied the same body. I had to accept that. Some people are capable of that kind of compartmentalization, of being genuinely warm in one moment and genuinely ruthless in the next, of holding both things without the contradiction troubling them. Beatrice was one of those people. I had spent 50 years not understanding that, because I am not one of those people. I could not have smiled at a bird documentary and organized the fraud simultaneously. The two things would not have fit in the same evening for me. They fit for her. That is the fact I had to accept, not with anger, with the specific accuracy of someone who has finally understood the full nature of what she was working with. I kept the storage unit for 8 months after I moved back into the house. I went back to it only twice. The second time I went through every box carefully. I kept the things that were genuinely mine, the books, the nursing certificates, the blue binder, which I had retrieved, and which I kept not as a reminder, but as a record, a document of what the plan looked like before it became real. I kept photographs. I kept the letter from Sophie, the 7-year-old, who had been on the ward for 14 months, and who had gone home, and who wrote to me every Christmas for 3 years after. I kept the things that were irreplaceable because they were made of time. Everything else I gave away. Furniture, kitchen things, items I had bought to fill the house when I first moved in that had been chosen quickly and practically because I had been focused on the larger thing and had not had the time or the energy to choose slowly and well. I gave them to the thrift store on Tryon Street that benefits the women's shelter. I drove 3 carloads over 3 Saturdays. Then I started over, slowly and on purpose, choosing things because I actually wanted them. A reading chair for the sunroom that took me 3 weeks to find because I wanted the exact right one. A kitchen table that is older than I am, and that I found at an estate sale in Concord and drove home in the back of a borrowed truck. Things that I would have kept if I had always owned them. Things with some weight and some history that did not need to perform anything. The house is different now from the house I came back to after the eviction. Not structurally, in the way of a house that has been lived in with full attention for several years. There are things on the walls that I chose. There are plants on the windowsills that I have kept alive. There is a bowl on the kitchen counter full of rocks that I have picked up from my own land over the years, from the creek bed and the field edge and the path along the south fence, and that I keep because the land made them, and they remind me that the land is still there and still mine, and still patient, and still doing what land does, which is simply existing without needing anything from me. The last thing I want to tell you about is the morning the construction crew finished the porch extension. When I first built the house, the wraparound porch went around 3 sides. I had always wanted it to go all the way around, a full circle, but the budget hadn't extended that far, and I had told myself I would add the 4th side eventually arrived 2 years after the eviction. I hired a small local crew, and they worked for 3 weeks, and when they were done, the porch was complete, all the way around, every side of the house, a full wraparound. The foreman was a man named Gerald, who had done several projects in the area, and who worked carefully and asked good questions and did not waste material. On the last day, when the crew had cleaned up and loaded the truck, I stood on the new section of porch and walked slowly around the house. The whole circuit, from the front where the oak trees are, and along the east side where the morning light comes in, and around the back where the cutting garden is, and along the south side where the lavender is, and back to the front. The full circle, the thing I had sketched in the blue binder 16 years ago, the whole plan realized. Gerald was still there finishing his paperwork when I came back to the front. He looked at me standing on the completed porch and he said, "Looks like exactly what you wanted." I said yes. He said, "Some things take a while." I said yes, they do. He drove away. I sat in the rocking chair I had put on the front section years before, and I looked at the oak trees in the afternoon light, and I thought about all of it, the whole sequence, the binder and the closing and the foundation pour and the night shift and the storage unit and Harrison Caldwell and the deposition and the courtroom and the rainy night with the intercom and all the years in between all of those things. The porch was complete. The plan was complete. The dirt was mine, and the house was mine, and the porch was mine, and the oak trees were doing what they had always been doing, which was standing in their own ground, being exactly what they were. I sat there for a long time. The evening light came in at a low angle through the oaks. The air was cool and smelt like the lavender from the south fans. There was no sound from inside the house, because I was outside in it, and no sound from any hospital because I was home, and no sound from my phone because I had left it on the kitchen table. Just the porch and the trees and the light. My name is Martha Vanguard. I worked the night shift for 24 years. I lived above a bakery that smelled like burning yeast. I drove a rusted sedan with a failing transmission. I kept a blue binder under my bed for 16 years. I built a house on land that belonged to my company, and my company belonged entirely to me. I added my mother's name to the deed because I trusted her, and she used that trust to take everything I had built. And then I remembered who owned the dirt. They thought they could steal my foundation. They forgot to check who held the ground beneath it. The porch is complete. The lavender is spreading. The oak trees are standing in their own ground exactly as they always have. And my quiet rise is finally, beautifully, completely done. I have one more thing to say, and then I am done. People ask me sometimes what I would do differently, whether I would have put Mother's name on the deed knowing what I know now, whether the $45,000 on the mother-in-law suite was worth it, whether I would have structured anything differently. The answer is no. I would not do it differently, not because the outcome was worth the cost exactly, but because every decision I made came from who I was at the time I made it. I put my mother's name on the deed because I loved her, and because I trusted her, and because I was raised to believe that love and trust were the same thing as safety. They are not the same thing as safety. I know that now love can coexist with betrayal, Trust can coexist with malice. The person who gave you a book with a loving inscription in the front can stand in a doorway a decade later and tell you that you don't have a real life. Both things can be true of the same person. I spent 50 years not understanding that. Understanding it now did not require me to become someone different. It required me to become more precisely who I already was, more deliberate, more protected in the ways that could be protected without abandoning the love that could not be protected. I still love the woman who named the bird in the nature documentary. I still love the woman who gave me the book with the inscription. Those women existed. They were real. The woman who stood in the doorway was also real. I hold all of those women in the same place, and I have made my peace with the complexity of what they add up to. I do not hold Mother responsible for what Chloe made of herself. Chloe made herself. The choices were hers. The entitlement was hers. The decision to forge a document and commit perjury was hers. Mother enabled much of that over a lifetime, but she did not make Chloe who Chloe is. Chloe made Chloe who Chloe is. I say this not to excuse anyone, but because accuracy matters to me more than the satisfaction of a clean villain. This story is more complicated than a clean villain. Most stories are. What I know for certain is this. I built something. I protected it. When it was taken, I reclaimed it through entirely legal and entirely earned means. I did not lie, or forge, or manipulate, or steal. I simply remembered who owned the dirt, and I exercised the rights that ownership conferred. I did what the law allowed. The law was sufficient. I am sitting on the porch that goes all the way around. The oak trees are doing what they do. The lavender is spreading along the south fence. The mist is long gone, and the morning is full now and warm, and the oak trees are in the light. I am Martha Vanguard. I own the dirt. I own the porch. I own the Tuesday morning and the warm coffee and the sound of the wind in my own trees. That is the whole story. That is everything. That is all of it.